By the late 1950s, the global jet age had already begun, but it had begun unevenly. The Boeing 707 entered service in October 1958 with Pan American. The Douglas DC-8 followed in 1959. Both aircraft were optimized around a very specific operating reality: long concrete runways in North America and Western Europe, high traffic density, and airlines that could afford infrastructure expansion. BOAC did not live in that world. At the time, British Overseas Airways Corporation operated one of the most geographically stretched route networks on the planet: London to Nairobi, London to Accra, London to Karachi, London to Singapore. These were not dense trunk routes between well-developed airports. They were imperial routes, long, thin, politically sensitive, and often served by airfields built for propeller aircraft, not heavy jets. Airports like Khartoum, Entebbe, Kano, and Lusaka were hot, high, and runway limited. Summer temperatures routinely exceeded 35 degrees C. Elevations pushed density altitude far beyond what early turbojets liked. Runway lengths were often under 8,000 feet, sometimes far less, with limited pavement strength and minimal safety margins. BOAC tested the 707 and DC-8 on these routes and found the same problem repeatedly: payload restrictions, fuel penalties, reduced range. In some cases, the aircraft could make the takeoff, but not with enough fuel or passengers to make the route commercially viable. In others, the climb performance margins were simply unacceptable. This was not a theoretical problem. It showed up in dispatch calculations, block times, and revenue forecasts. So, in 1956, BOAC did something unusual. Instead of adapting to an American aircraft, it issued a requirement for a jet that fit its world. The specification called for exceptional hot and high performance, steep climb capability, short field takeoff margins, and low noise footprints for politically sensitive airports. Range mattered, but only if it could be achieved without sacrificing payload on departure. Vickers-Armstrongs responded with the VC10. The design logic was deliberate and internally consistent. 4 Rolls-Royce Conway turbofans were mounted at the rear of the fuselage, keeping wing surfaces aerodynamically clean and maximizing lift at low speeds. This configuration dramatically reduced foreign object damage on rough runways and allowed higher thrust application earlier in the takeoff roll. The wing itself was large, highly swept, and optimized for lift rather than cruise efficiency, with full-span high-lift devices that gave the aircraft takeoff and climb performance unmatched by its contemporaries. The result was a jet that could depart short runways at high weights, climb aggressively in hot conditions, and clear obstacles that would force a 707 or DC-8 to shed payload. Noise levels around terminal areas were significantly lower, an important factor for airports surrounded by urban development or operating under political pressure. The VC-10 first flew on 29 June 1962. By the time it entered BOAC service in April 1964, its capabilities were already clear. In operational trials, the aircraft routinely outperformed American jets out of constrained airfields. Crews praised its handling. Dispatch reliability was strong. On the routes it was designed for, it worked exactly as intended. This was not an experimental aircraft chasing novelty. It was a purpose-built solution to a real airline problem, defined by real routes, real airfields, and real constraints. The problem was not that the VC-10 solved the wrong problem. The problem was that the world was about to stop needing it. By the time the first VC-10 rolled off the production line in 1962, the world of aviation was undergoing profound transformation, a shift that would ultimately render the aircraft a commercial anomaly despite its technical brilliance. The VC-10 had been conceived in the mid-1950s, specifically to solve real operational problems faced by BOAC: hot and high airports in Africa and Asia, short runways in colonial outposts, and long imperial routes stretching thousands of miles across regions with sparse infrastructure. Rear-mounted engines, a T-tail, and a fuselage optimized for short takeoff performance made the VC-10 uniquely capable in these contexts. Yet, as the jet entered service, the market had already begun moving in a direction that would marginalize its intended niche. Decolonization accelerated faster than anyone anticipated. By the early 1960s, countries across Africa, the Middle East, and Southeast Asia had gained independence, prompting the nationalization of many airlines and the reorganization of air networks. Formerly guaranteed stops along imperial routes disappeared, while local infrastructure improvements were uneven and often limited. Airports that had once required the VC-10's exceptional field performance either closed, upgraded to accommodate larger jets, or fell into disuse as air traffic patterns shifted. This meant that the very operational constraints that justified the VC-10's existence were disappearing in real time. Airline consolidation intensified the challenge. European carriers, particularly in the UK and Western Europe, were increasingly adopting fleet standardization as a strategic necessity. The Boeing 707 and Douglas DC-8 dominated long-haul operations because they offered economies of scale in maintenance, crew training, and scheduling. Standardized fleets allowed airlines to redeploy aircraft across multiple routes without retraining crews or stocking unique spare parts inventories. The VC-10, optimized for specific operational conditions, could not benefit from these efficiencies. Even BOAC, its primary customer, faced pressure to harmonize operations with more widely used aircraft, reducing the commercial viability of ordering additional VC-10s. Fuel economics emerged as a critical factor. The Conway engines powering the VC-10 were technically advanced, featuring early bypass turbofans with excellent performance, but they consumed more fuel per seat mile than the emerging generation of high bypass engines in the Boeing 707-320 Intercontinental or Douglas DC-860 series. At a time when airlines were beginning to treat fuel as a major operating cost rather than a subsidized expense, the marginal advantage of superior takeoff performance could not outweigh operational inefficiencies. Combined with the aircraft's higher maintenance complexity, due in part to rear-mounted engines, a T-tail configuration, and extensive auxiliary systems, the VC-10 became increasingly expensive to operate on routes where its unique capabilities were not required. By 1965, the effect was clear. The aircraft's potential customer base had already collapsed. Orders from other carriers never materialized, and some existing orders were canceled or deferred. The commercial jet market was converging on flexibility and cost efficiency, rather than the specialized performance the VC-10 offered. Airlines were no longer looking for the perfect aircraft for one mission. They sought a versatile workhorse capable of flying profitably on multiple routes, often with marginal performance trade-offs. The VC-10 remained technically brilliant, but strategically constrained, a solution to problems that were disappearing faster than the aircraft could reach customers. Fleet economics, once a secondary concern compared to operational necessity, now dictated airline strategy. Cost-optimized jets like the 707 and DC-8 provided adequate range, speed, and reliability and could be operated on a wide variety of routes without special infrastructure. Training crews for one aircraft type, minimizing spare parts inventories, and achieving high aircraft utilization rates became more valuable than maximum performance on isolated hot and high routes. Airlines had shifted from buying solutions to buying spreadsheets, metrics-driven decisions based on cost per seat mile, fuel burn, maintenance hours, and return on investment. Despite its dwindling commercial prospects, the VC-10 found a second life in specialized military and governmental roles. The Royal Air Force quickly recognized the aircraft's unique capabilities. Its short takeoff and landing performance, combined with long-range capability, made it ideal for VIP transport, troop movement, and strategic airlift in areas lacking developed infrastructure. The aircraft's high performance in tropical and hot and high environments remained unmatched for decades, with operational ceilings, payload capacities, and runway flexibility exceeding most contemporary jets of comparable size. Civilian operators also exploited the VC-10's strengths in niche markets. It excelled on routes with challenging airfields in Africa and the Middle East, as well as on specialized charter services requiring maximum payload on shorter runways. In every application, the aircraft performed flawlessly, often exceeding the operational capabilities of the more widely adopted 707 or DC-8. Yet these markets were limited, and the overall commercial impact remained small. The VC-10's commercial failure was not a reflection of its design, safety, or performance. The aircraft had been conceived to solve very real airline problems, and it solved them perfectly. The problem was timing. The operational context that justified its design was disappearing almost simultaneously with its entry into service.